Hi, everybody. This is Susan Clinton and Erica Mello, and this is late August. We're doing rebroadcast for this podcast, August 24th, and we also have another rebroadcast for August 31st. These are some of our favorite podcasts that everyone really liked. One's on the shoulder, and one is on SI joint pain. We hope you enjoy the rebroadcast. Thank you for always being a great listener. And thank you for allowing Susan and Erica, or myself and Erica, to take a little time off ourselves this summer.
Yes.
Erica, anything you want to say?
No, just thank everybody for listening. And enjoy the last bits of summer, and we'll see you in the fall.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, everybody. This is Erica Mello and Susan Clinton, and we are the hosts of Tough to Treat. How are you, Susan?
I'm well, Erica. How are you today?
I am good, thank you. We hope that you've enjoyed our podcast. Let's dive in. My patient, and I apologize for the audience, I'm just coming off a cold, so I may sound a bit hoarse and such, so I do apologize ahead of time. Okay, this is a patient of mine who I've seen on multiple occasions for many different issues. He had originally come to see me for some hip pain and some foot pain and knee pain I'm just looking at his chart, last year, June of 2017. He was doing well. He returned to see me over the summer for some issues with his back. And he was fine, good to go, came and went. And now he came back at the beginning of September. And I've only seen him a few times. He works in the wine business, and so he travels a lot, to different countries, and he is extremely busy. So we try to fit each other in before and after his trip. So his main issue is a left shoulder pain. He's had it for years. He mentioned it to me when I treated him for his knee and his foot, and he mentioned it to me when I was treating his back. Wasn't a big deal. It was just like, oh, when I get done with the back, let's look at the shoulder. So it wasn't really, affecting his life in any way. So just some history. The guy is a cyclist. He does do a lot of these long trips overseas on bike. Since I'm in New York City, he goes around Central Park all the time. It's a road bike, and he's pretty religious with that. He does it at least 4 times a week. And so he saw a orthopedic, I think a physiatrist here last year, who diagnosed him with tendonitis, quote unquote. Initially, his symptoms, he thinks they came on when he was trying to prep for a climb to the Matterhorn, and it was a level 5 climb, so it was just a lot of gripping and not rock climbing, but it was just a lot of climbing and hiking, and just a combination of both, using his arms. He did a lot of push-ups at the time as well. This was in December of 2017. He actually got a cortisone shot, which gave him 4 months of relief, and he reported that after 4 months the symptoms did return, but the intensity was not as bad. He is right hand dominant, so he's not a lefty. His symptoms are on his left. He tends to use his laptop quite a bit, where he is turned to the right a lot, okay, for some reason. It's just sort of his office setup. And on the bike, in chatting with him, so he's leaning forward, his left hand is behind the right. So he's almost in this left rotation when he's on the bike.
Okay.
So, for people like that, I always say, okay, well, how's your position on the bike? How's your position at the office? What are you doing that could be feeding into the problem? So since he does bike quite a bit, he said, oh, but now that you think of it, my left hand is behind. So the reason I brought this patient up is at the beginning, after the first visit, he felt significantly better. And I'll tell you what I found and what I did. But then a few weeks later, he came back, and it was sort of going downhill again. And I want to get your feedback on, because sometimes we have patients, we've seen them for different issues, and, we don't get complacent, but we may overlook things, or, I'm always leery when someone gets better immediately. I know it sounds crazy, but and the minute they come back, like, I felt great after one visit, they're good, they inevitably, something else is going on. And that's my experience. I don't know about you, but that's my experience. So
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so I just did I had just come, when did I see him? No, it was before I went on the Sarman course. So I basically just took a look at him in standing. Just, I do a general listening. It took me to his scapula on his left side, his rhomboids, his upper traps. They were all just sort of jacked up, a lot of muscle tone. Clavicle was elevated. This is just what I was seeing in standing. His scapula was, abducted. It was depressed. The left humeral head was anterior. So he was in this sort of shoulder girdle torsion to the right, elevated clavicles, everything elevated. Nothing crazy, but it was just what I noticed. I also noticed that his upper rib cage, his third, fourth, and fifth ribs were more prominent on his left, okay, which means he was probably in this left translation, right rotation. Nothing crazy with the neck, a few just sort of twists and turns, nothing, to be really honest, that I wouldn't have expected given what I saw in the shoulder. And that's what I looked at. So his main issue was lifting his arm into abduction. So when you're doing not internal rotation, but almost like abduction and neutral to internal rotation. I'm just showing you here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he could flex his shoulder, he could abduct his shoulder, he could put his hand behind his back, all singular motions he was fine with. So when you combined it with an abduction, neutral, internal, external rotation, and then taking the arm back like you're rowing, that's when it got him. That was the only thing that bothered him. So for example, reaching back, not so much to put his hand in his pocket because he could do that, but when he went up into abduction, like if he was in a car and he had to reach back to put the seatbelt on, that got him. Maybe hailing a cab in New York a little bit with that abduction, that got him. Other than that, he was actually pretty good. He could sleep on that side, no major problems. His recreational history was basically on the bike outside. So when I had him do that, and the minute he did that, his scapula elevated. Everything that I saw in standing got worse. So the rhomboids turned on, the upper traps turned on, the scapula elevated. But the position of his shoulder girdle was unchanged. The position of his upper ribs were unchanged. So it was basically.
This was while he was on the bike?
No, while he was elevating his arm into abduction, internal rotation, or neutral.
Did he have pain with cycling?
No.
Okay, so no problems in cycling. So weight bearing's okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
No problems in cycling. It was really open chain, but not just raising your arm like you're in class. It was really that combination. And then when he added a little bit of, scapular retraction to it, he got it. I'm thinking maybe pinching biceps tendon, but I didn't want to think too specifically on this. So because the first thing that I saw was the scapula, and it was just, yes, your scapula is supposed to elevate a little bit when you raise your arm, but his was like going from the get-go, and it was already in I believe not the best position for what he needed to do. Some people have that position in their shoulder blades and their clout, and they're fine, and that's fine. But when he lifted his arm, it got worse. So what I did was I just basically put my hand under his axilla and I unloaded the shoulder. I just gave him I'm doing it here. I just gave him some support. That's all I did. And I said, just do the same thing over again. And he was like, oh, that's much easier. So I'm thinking, okay, what did I just do? Yes, I unloaded the scapula. I unloaded some of the nerves in the neck. I'm going to stop here and get your thoughts, because sometimes with me, when I do that correction, when I unload the scapula, I'm unloading many other things, not just the scapula. But it was much better after that.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I'm sitting here thinking, the whole time I'm thinking, what's going on in the cervical spine? But actually, when you just mentioned that, I'm starting to think maybe it's not the C-spine. There might be some tension up in there into the cervical plexus, but I think this is much more of a brachial plexus issue.
Yeah.
If you're putting the tennis ball and actually giving a little space, perhaps what you're doing is alleviating maybe some compression onto the brachial plexus.
Yep.
Underneath there. So it felt good. It felt good to kind of get that ball or, whatever underneath there, and, in kind of a roundabout way. I guess if people like to use the word release, I'm not a big person about that word, but, kind of just changing the input into the subscapularis, but it sounds to me like a little bit brachial plexus, although he's not having like the tingling down the arm and the other stuff, but that doesn't mean that you still can't have localized, kind of joint symptoms. And the other thing that made me think about brachial plexus was it's concomitant motion that gets him.
It's
Yeah.
not a singular plane motion.
No.
So so something's happening with the humeral head as he
Mhm.
goes into abduction and then winds up. It's either not rotating or not or maybe depressing too much. I don't know. You had your hands on him, but
Yep.
and I'm just wondering if with those motions he's getting into, because maybe there's something going on and he's not gliding in the glenoid like he should.
Yeah.
That maybe he's getting dropped into a little bit of humeral head depression,
Yep.
which is actually just giving him a pain response rather than, the tingling down the arm kind of thing. And that could account for why everything's tightening up and pulling, because, your brain's not going to want your humeral head sitting on the brachial plexus, I can imagine. So that's very interesting.
Right.
Also interesting that, but it kind of makes me think that also because when he gets into weight bearing onto his arm with cycling, it doesn't bother him. So that the weight bearing must glide his humeral head back up.
That's true.
And so as he goes into abduction, it's gliding down.
Yes.
And again, neutral abduction isn't a problem, but he adds rotation to it.
Yep.
That's when you're probably so that's my first thought. But anyway, go ahead. This is fascinating.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's interesting because when he got on the bike, his left arm was back, but that's a movement pattern he's adopted for years, and for whatever reason that works for him. So, and it's interesting when he was preparing for the Matterhorn, he did a lot of push-ups. Okay, fine. That was just a piece of information. He's not one to be in the weight room. He's just a cyclist, and not a big, weight lifter. So what I ended up doing, because of time on that first visit, I wanted just to see what would happen if I just got my hands in there on the scapula and just did some distraction, just to see if the rhomboid tone would decrease. I did a little bit of soft tissue in there. I was just upper rotation distraction. I mean, just trying to get the blood flow and to free up if there was anything that was limiting the mobility, to see if it was a mobility issue versus a timing issue of the cuff or something. And so I ended up doing just putting a piece of tape to unload the scapula and unload now that we're talking, unload the whole brachial plexus, and he felt significantly better. So I talked to him about changing his office ergonomics as well, to get the computer and the laptop more in front of him. So he came back the next visit, which was probably the following week. I'm just looking at my notes here. Yes, he felt significantly better. Okay. And he said the tape was really helpful, et cetera, et cetera. And I repeated a few of this similar interventions to what I did the prior session. And I also for some reason, my gut was telling me to go up into that upper rib cage a bit, because I had him repeat the task, the abduction and internal rotation. And he was still elevating, but it was much better. But he also exhibited this sort of compression in the front of his chest, where he was almost like the pec minor was turning on, and it was almost like bringing the shoulder into more of like this twist to the right. Does that make sense? So I did a little bit of just some manual therapy in through there. I had him lie on his side and had him just do some elevation, and we added some movement patterns on his side in and out of rotation. I did do some, I'm a big believer in just some rhythmic stabilization work for the shoulder, just to start firing up some of the appropriate muscle groups. And I did a little bit of that. And I ended up having him go on his tummy. And I had him do like that figure 4 position that, right, almost like a pivot prone. And he had a hard time getting into that position on his left side. And so I just had him drop his elbows a bit, and it was almost like he was impinging up, and that's a combined motion. So I got him out of that position because I felt that was I was winding him up a bit too much. So I pretty much did the same thing. I taped him. We did some motor control and side lying with rhythmic stabilization. I just did some soft tissue work as I did prior. He was fine. He was going mountain biking that weekend, up in Vermont. And he came back the week later, and he had lost some of that carryover that he had from the previous visits. This would be his 3rd visit. And This was actually after I had come back from the Shirley Sarman course. So I was just like her advanced upper quadrant. So I was all into the scapula with her stuff. But I had him just do a basic single arm raise, basic shoulder flexion. And I saw something there that I hadn't seen in the beginning. It wasn't painful, but I saw him elevate the shoulder, which he didn't do initially with that movement pattern. He did it more with the combined pattern. It was all much better, but he had lost something. So was it with mountain bike and getting on the bike? Maybe. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'm just going to fast forward ahead. So he went traveling for a couple weeks. I think he was in Europe. He came back, still no change. So he had made great progress the first visit. He lost a bit from the third visit, and then he went traveling for 3 weeks, and he came back, and he pretty much was not changed. He kept saying the best was the first visit. The best was the first visit. So I'm going to stop and get your thoughts.
Yeah, first of all, when he travels, does he carry a bag or does he backpack it?
I think both.
Okay. That starts to make a little bit of sense to me. You said in the very beginning that he was an extensive traveler.
Yes, he travels a lot. Yeah.
So I'm wondering how he's carrying his bag, or if he's doing a backpack.
When he comes to see me, I believe he has a backpack, and he's always carrying it over his left shoulder, ironically. Yeah. Now that I'm visualizing him coming into my office.
Yeah.
So
I'm wondering if that may be one of the drivers of his dominant patterning here going on, because that would certainly, just pull in the whole raise up the shoulder thing. And also if he's got some increased pec minor tone, that would be a piece of it. Part of what I'm thinking is when you saw that whole shoulder girdle raising up with flexion, later that you didn't see before is, you did a lot of work on the scapula, and I'm wondering if you actually kind of got the scapula moving, whereas before it wasn't. So it wasn't lifting up as much, and now it is because it's moving better. So you may be kind of going, kind of like peeling the onion. You may be actually, by cleaning some stuff up, in the movement pattern, now the thing is starting to reveal itself. And also, people like this who kind of like put up with it for a while, when you bring it to their attention, then all of a sudden, their pain experience changes, because now they're kind of internally micromanaging all of their movement patterns, kind of without, it's like when you get something stuck in your teeth, you can't leave it alone. And so I'm wondering if, a little bit of that is going on too. Like he's kind of thinking, oh, well, what if it's this position? What if it's that position? And maybe doing a lot of motion testing and, different things to kind of, try to pinpoint what's actually happening. Whereas before he just kind of these mass movements and didn't worry about it unless he, reached back and did some of those things. So that could be a kind of a piece of that too. I'm still, all of this is still kind of hitting me about, something that for whatever reason, and especially since he couldn't get prone with his arm, put his forehead on the back of his hand, for everybody who's trying to picture the prone position. So it's abduction, external rotation, and you drop your forehead onto your hands, in the prone position. He couldn't get his arm in there. Well, of course, that's the concomitant windup that he couldn't do. But there's for whatever reason, his humeral head does not like to glide superior. It sounds like to me, it's really not doing that.
No.
And so I'm not so sure about brachial plexus stuff anymore, as much as I'm kind of thinking, gosh, this really sounds like a real joint glide problem to me, more than than anything else.
Yeah.
And you've gotten the scapula gliding better, but the joint itself, and he may have been using some of those scapular patterns to help him actually, move his shoulder joint as much as he possibly could. And now that's been, changed a bit. And so now what you're really looking at is what's happening in the internal, mechanics of the shoulder joint itself. Yep. The other thing is too, and I liked what you talked about with the pec minor and kind of looking at that, and that led me into, is he carrying a backpack and what's he doing? One of the things that might be really helpful for you is get in and take a look at his rib movement with breathing and see if you can. I'm wondering with his, he went mountain biking and then he went traveling. If there's some, when he respirates, when he's getting going, I'm wondering if he's able to access good pump handle motion, in his upper ribs. He's probably getting good basilar motion. Maybe he's getting a lot of scaling stuff, but I'm wondering if he's lacking the pump handle kind of motion. That'd be something really good to check out. And you can just have him just put his arms on a chair, on the chair arms, and just hold on and have him take some deep breaths and see if, you can get that pump handle to start going. That might be a kind of a reverse way to glide the humeral head upward, because you're kind of working, you know what I'm saying? You're working the ribs and the other stuff. It's like, holding one end and moving the other, so you're moving that end and, the shoulders being held. So things are moving around it instead, because that was kind of what you were doing with the ball underneath too, is the shoulder was kind of being, held, and everything else, all the soft tissue underneath was being mobilized, which is, thinking maybe with the ribs too would be a good way to do it. But that would be something he could take into and use with, because he's probably not going to stop carrying a backpack. But if you can give him some better things to do while he's carrying the backpack, and see if that begins to, change his patterning around, his backpack carry, or, bike stuff. Because even though he doesn't hurt when he's doing those things, they may be feeding into a posture that prevents him from doing some of the other motions. But it really is starting to sound like a true glide problem to me.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And, the rib movement is great because with breathing, because his upper rib cage, I guarantee you, he probably doesn't have great movement there because of the amount of cycling that he does. And he's just so gripping. And, I initially thought that, why is his scapula elevating? Why is his humeral head is anterior, obviously, just because of the movement patterns that he does, not unusual and very common. So I would agree. I do think it's a joint problem. So, when you elevate your arm and you combine it with different motions, your humeral head has to do something. It has to move, and spin, roll, and glide the appropriate way. And the cortisone shot gave him relief, but if it's 4 months and he just resorts to the same movement problem over and over again. And that's what I was trying to explain to him. So the next visit, I said, let's just be a little creative here. So I had him do his movement again. I'm just doing here abduction, sort of neutral rotation. I said, just push into, I put one finger on top of his left wrist. I said, just push into my hand like you're just almost like I was muscle testing him, but I said, I'm just going to give you a little bit of resistance just to fire up the cuff just a little and do your movement. Just lift your arm up, just push into my finger a little bit. And he was able to do that, and he had zero pain, and it looked significantly better. So I had him down, I got him on his side again and had him it was just easier to do it that way. So, just basically having him just push into external rotation isometrically.
Yeah.
And just move. And I got him up. I think I maybe did 15 reps of that, got him back up and sitting, had him repeat his movement, and he was fine. Okay. So then I said, okay, well then, we don't want to go down the rabbit hole of let's just give him a band and do external rotation, because that's, that can be helpful. But for him, I think it was more of a timing issue in terms of, yes, his humeral head was not functioning appropriately, and yes, I was able to fire the cuff up and get him moving, but he's not going to learn how to do that immediately, and he'll go out and put his backpack on, and then he'll just come back the next time and he'll be the same. So I gave him a couple things to do at various isometrics at 0, 45, and 90 degrees of abduction, just literally having him do some external rotation with that. And he came back the following, he traveled again for a couple of weeks. He travels in between the visits. And he said that it was working on doing those isometrics was extremely helpful. So I'm going to stop there and you let me.
I love it. That's great. Thank you for taking him down that path, because we could have gone two ways. Number one, we could restore glide, but I still think, and even if that's the choice that you want to make out there, that's fine with me. That probably would have been my first thing. I probably would have gotten him into sideline and some internal rotation as much as he could get into with his arm behind his back, and I really would have worked the superior glide from that direction and position. But the thing that I would have done after that would have taken him into the timed, it's part of rhythmic stabilization, the timing, the timed isometrics. positional isometrics, sorry, not timed isometrics, but
Got it.
that's a basic part of rhythmic stabilization, which, you know, could be called 1,000 things, just movement of the shoulder. But I like it because when you get into the, again, it's that which part is moving. So you keep the hand from moving, the shoulder joint has to move. The humeral head is going to have to do the motion because the hand can't. You know what I'm saying? So we've got that reverse kind of closed chain thing going on. And with the arm, it's really, I think, much more productive to get it into a bunch of different positions because the arm is different from the leg. The arm is all about, you know, moving in all planes around the body, whereas the leg, you know, the body's moving all over the legs, you know, more. So it's, you know, kind of a little bit different, but when you keep the hand from moving or the arm from moving, something's got to move somewhere. Yeah. And so that's kind of a way to kind of actually get those, you know, that, you know, whatever you want to believe about internal biomechanics, it doesn't really matter to me. We just want that humeral head to move.
Yes.
And we want it to move pain-free.
Yep.
And this was a way to get him to do something to counteract the dominant posturing that he was in. Like you said, he was just going to go back, but, you know, he would never, if we had just given him bands to do, you know, all we're doing is kind of strengthening a pattern that isn't really appropriate for him because it's a pattern that takes him into pain. So I like the way that you pulled him back from that some, but gave him something really good and simple to do that seemed to alleviate his symptoms. So, you know, so I guess, you know, the question is why? I don't know why it worked, but
I don't know
it worked, you know. And so that the next step then is, what did you do? Because I would have taken him into some timed motion between those isometrics as we move forward.
Well, that's what I'm talking. That was my last visit, which was before Thanksgiving.
Okay.
So that's where we are now. So where should I go now? So
So I think, you know, you could go closed and open chain, I think. You know, you could, you know, he's been doing some isometric stuff, which is so cool with the rotator cuff and loading in those different positions. For whatever I've done this a lot with people that weightlift, you know, and overhead, you know, lifting that end up with, you know, some of that pain in their shoulder. It's, you know, we just get them loading in some different positions below to really kind of beef up the work of the deeper muscles a little bit. So you could take him into, you know, just see what kinds of ranges he has now. And I would take him to closer to some of those end ranges and start loading. You know, because you had him loading in pretty good mid ranges, and that seemed to have helped. You know, provided that he's still feeling good when he comes in, or is still the trajectory is going, you know, back in the direction you want it. I would start loading him, you know, kind of on those outer edges of his motion, outer edges of internal, outer edges of external with abduction, various things. And he can also kind of put his hand on the wall, you know, and move his body around too. So you can, you know, kind of go at it from a couple of different ways. But definitely, I think that you're onto something there. That would be the direction that I would have gone for sure. And I would just increase the range of motion of his loading. The other thing is that if you haven't done the, you know, looking at the upper ribs and the movement of the upper ribs, I'd add that in just because it's just going to be, you know, he's a biker and he's a hiker. You know, if we can get all of those ribs, you know, moving great, that's just better for much more efficient respiration for him. And if there is a bit of some neural tension in there, then that could help begin to kind of move that out in a, you know, pretty natural way. But that could give him some other things that he could actually do when he's, you know, when you're walking. I want you, you know, if he's got the backpack on, I want you to think about making sure the air is getting into this upper part of your chest, not here in your neck, but in the upper part of your chest. You know, as you're kind of moving or as you're biking, is there any way that he could come up and release the grip just to kind of straighten up and access the pump handle, breathing a little bit before he goes back down into the crouch to hold on? You know, if he's on a flat stretch while mountain biking, I mean, that's hard to do when you're on a hill, but.
No, it's great stuff. I think for him, because it didn't really limit his function, like the back or like the knee did, he didn't care. It was one specific movement pattern. And, you know, literally the ironic thing is, and, you know, after treating him for his back, I literally one visit, the back was good to go. Okay. it was more probably of an acute issue. So he's expecting, oh, I'll be good with the shoulder for one visit. I'm like, not so much, because you've had this for over a year. The back was like, 2 weeks. Okay.
Yeah.
So
and probably likely has had some shoulder posture patterning for longer than a year, so it's
sure.
and it's not his dominant side either.
No.
So it's kind of like, oh, dadgummit, every time I reach back like that, it hurts. And then they go on and do something else and forget about it,
Yeah, and the more I'm sitting here, the more I think that backpack while traveling, because it really depresses the whole that left part of his shoulder. And I think that's definitely a contributing factor. In terms of the loading, I like the isometrics. I'm wondering, because he's so okay with closed chain, I'm wondering if I get him on all fours.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I was kind of,
there.
With the arm on the wall is kind of a variation of getting on all fours. Weight bearing doesn't bother him.
No.
So it would be good to explore some of those motions.
Yep.
And see where you can take, where's the edge, as Corey Blinkenstaff likes to say, find the edge of the movement pattern, and where can he get in there and actually explore what feels good and what's kind of like, it's a little dicey right there. Maybe I just need to kind of skirt around that and just keep moving until he can kind of smooth that edge out a little bit, because then he can use his whole trunk. Plus the scapular, helps kind of just get the scapula and trunk moving together quite a bit as well. And you've already worked on that some, so it would feed into pulling those patterns together just a little bit. But the weight bearing is going to glide his humerus up too.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. After the first visit, now that I'm thinking, it's always helpful to talk these things through, because you realize after looking at your chart. So the first visit, maybe first 2 visits, I mobilized the scapula, taped him, got things moving, and then he was good. But then this little humeral head started popping up literally, and that sometimes that may have waylaid me a little bit at the beginning, because I didn't see that at the beginning with the scapula. It was so obvious. But the reports of, that was the best. Now I'm about the same. So if you're continuing to do the same thing that you've done, like for the first 2 sessions, and the person got really much better and now they're not, you got to go down. That's the lesson learned here. You got to go down a different path.
Yep.
And you got to
change
directions. And that's what I did. And so I'm going to have to contact him. He's probably traveling. But the thing is, he traveled a lot. And I think he just resorted to his old strategy in between
sessions.
Of
course. Yeah. Traveling is stressful, and you're going to get back into your old patterns and do what you can to be as efficient as possible.
He's traveling internationally as well.
I think the other take-home message here is scale, scale, scale. Your instinct said do not put him in regular old band exercises. Once you found out that, okay, if we could get him sidelined and he could do a few of these isometrics, and that tends to change things, how can I get him to do this at home? What can we do, and how is he going to do it? And when you got his buy-in on it, because it made a difference for him. But not go straight into, okay, well, let's just work external rotation. It's like, well, no, maybe not. Maybe again, where on the scale were you? When you're doing just isometrics at different parts of the range, that's on the lower end of the scale. And that's okay to stay there for a little bit and let that get better, and then come back, rather than trying to go to the top end of the scale for the home exercise program, which would have been bands, right? Because that not only do you have to pull against the resistance, but you have to pull in reverse motion.
Correct.
And he may not have been quite ready for that.
Right.
So,
right. Exactly. So that's that. I mean, that's where I'm at. So I will report back and let everybody know how he's doing. And that's great. Thank you for the input. I will keep you posted.
Yeah,
Very
absolutely. Cool. All right. We've had a couple of interesting shoulder patients over the last few podcasts. We'll have to pull them together for everybody in maybe a series.
Yes.
So if you go to our website, one of the things that we're going to be doing in 2019 is actually kind of pulling some of our podcasts that have similar themes together, so you don't have to go hunt and peck looking through them to find, I want to hear what they were talking about with the shoulder. Well, we'll have them kind of all grouped together like a shoulder series, so you can listen, okay, so here's all the stuff on the shoulder, or here's all the stuff on the foot, or here's all the stuff on pelvic floor and incontinence, or some of the other things we've talked about. So to try to make it a little bit easier for people to access a particular topic if they're just wanting to review something or listen to something or hear what we have to say about foot pain when it doesn't really come from the foot.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so that's
Okay.
going to be one of our things. So
Awesome. We will see you all again. And thanks for checking in and playing along with us all this time.
Yeah, it's been fabulous.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.